Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome, everybody, to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksci-fi.com website. This is your January 29th, 2016 edition. We're starting a little late, but that won't matter to anybody who's picking this up as a podcast. And our special guest tonight is Kenneth Strickland, and he's the author and co-publisher of Four Corners. We'll get into that in a little while. If you want to look him up on Amazon, I'm going to drop the link in the chat room for those of you who are online now. If not, the rest of you go and search for Kenneth Strickland on Amazon, and we'll get started. Kenneth, thank you for showing up, man. Other than your mind, don't feel bad, man. I mean, stuff happens. I was just talking before you got on. We had one night where two things happened. TalkShoe, where we're on now, crapped out, and then there was a nationwide update to the cellular networks that they had to actually roll back. So there were whole swaths of the country where you couldn't get cell phone coverage. Sprint was down. I was like cussing at them and everything. So that happens. But welcome, man. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, man, tell everybody where you're coming to us from.
Well, I am in Long Beach, California right now.
And the weather is?
Well, the weather has been pretty nice. They're saying that there's supposed to be some rain on Sunday. And it's a little cool where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in my space, and I'm just kicking back, relaxing.
Well, wait a minute, man. What's a little cool? Because I'm sitting here in Chicago. It's 35 degrees with a wind chill of 24.
What have you got? That little cool? Okay, I mean it's been around. It's been around what 60, 69, somewhere in there. So I said it's a little cool.
Man, I'd take that all day. Anyway, let's. I think. Oh man, I closed that tab. That's okay. Basically, I've got the information about you as an author, and you and I are close to the same age. But I did it in dog years style. So, like in white people years, I'm 187. But the cool thing is when you've got a couple books out there, and you are a bona fide author because you're published. But I'm wondering, early on, first of all, did you grow up in California?
I grew up in California. I was born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. But my parents moved out here in the early 60s. And, I went to school here, graduated high school, did some junior college. And, along the way, I found the stuff that I enjoyed, and I pretty much enjoyed it. And at one point, I got kind of ticked off at somebody and decided I could do better than that, and then started writing. But I'd been writing ever since I was a kid.
Yeah, I was wondering, how old was that when you kind of got the bug in you?
Well, I got to tell you, when I was like in junior high, I would make up books, stapling together like index cards and my own drawings and my own little stories and that sort of thing. And that's really how I started. I was also telling myself stories, along with reading a lot. So I was reading comic books. I'd read newspapers. I'd read magazines. And I was a major comic book fan. And and I got into some books. You can't just not dabble in a little of everything. And and the first science fiction book that really sort of kicked my head in was Starman's Son by Andre Norton. That it was a post-apocalyptic. It was a 50s post-apocalyptic story, and it was one of the few science fiction books I read at that time that actually had a black character who was not, a joke.
Right.
He wasn't the he wasn't an idiot. He was like a prince of a pony clan. and he helps out the hero, and then he leaves, and then the hero goes on and finishes the rest of his story. But I love that story. I seriously love that story, so much so I ended up buying 3 paperback editions of the book. So I still got it, and it's somewhere in my storage. But I was watching Star Trek. I was watching all the TV science fiction. I was reading the books that interested me and grabbed my attention and made me want to read them. It isn't until way later that I read something like Dune. But I also knew, I wasn't going to be like, say, a Ray Bradbury or an Isaac Asimov, because either I got into them or I didn't get into them. I'd read a few pages of it, and if it didn't intrigue me enough, I didn't go any further.
Right. Well, okay. I mean, were you when you were reading? Because it sounds like you started fairly young. And even as you're fairly young, if something doesn't jump off right away, it's hard to get into. But you've gotten to this point, this late in life, you've got, excuse me, the kind of work that you have now. When you were doing that, was it just the writing, the storytelling? Was there any graphical component? Did you draw or anything?
Well, actually, I did. The thing was, at one point, James was trying to make a periodical, a monthly, and every chapter, every other chapter or so, I would draw something. Can't find the drawings now, but I at least still had the prose.
Sure.
But James C. Jones, who's the publisher of Mythical Legends, was trying to do his earliest publishing efforts, and I seriously got into it, and I seriously enjoyed it, and I had a poem or two that I gave. I had a poem or two that I gave to James to publish. He would. And I did some drawings, and then he'd take those drawings, and then he'd take those drawings are the ones I did for the poem, which is called Juggler of the Spears, and push that even further. And that was like some of his earliest CGI efforts on top of my drawn stuff, and I was completely blown away by it. I thought it was absolutely wonderful.
It's kind of cool to see your work come to life in a way that's different from what you've done.
Oh yeah, every time, because it makes you, it puts you in this, whoa, I can do this. Somebody thinks I can do this. Besides me, thinks I can do this, and it was the coolest thing ever. Coolest thing ever. I was also, I think, around the same time, I was a member of the Star Trek Club. I was on one of the chapters. They were called ships, and I did artwork and drawings, and I ended up on 3 ships. And I did artwork and some story, and I did either artwork and story, or I did some artwork, or do covers or something, because, they always needed material, and it's, it made me sit down and start doing the work,
And doing it seriously?
And taking it seriously, because it made me think, how do I do it? And a lot of times I would do crazy. I always thought at that time one of my best friends was things like whiteout and X-Acto knives, because I would take images of Star Trek ships, cut them up, paste them down on elements that I added to it, and that was fun to do. That was fun to do, but it made me want to work on it. There was another. The first ship I was on was called the Achenar, and that was with a then girlfriend. And another ship, heaven help me, I've forgotten that name, but I did drawings for them. And the third one was the USS Shadowstar, which was a BFF at the time, best friend at the time, and he and his girlfriend, put together their magazine called Spectrum, and we did stuff. And we did stuff, and I did stuff for that. But I was also writing. I would tell myself stories to keep the stuff lubricated. I was also doing things like drawing my own comic books. Mm-hmm. You know how that goes.
Well, comic books. Comic books like you just putting it together, stapling it, or comic books like actually getting them printed and published.
Well, no, it was. Well, you know how it was. It was a. Let me see if I can do this sort of thing, and I go and I get and I'd get sheets of typing paper. I'd count out a number of sheets, what I hoped the story would go to, fold them over, and do start with the cover, and then go to the story, and and that's how I did. That's how I did it,
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun to do, and and I've got characters I came up for the comic books. Not all of them are still working in my head, but I remember them, and I remembered how much fun I had. I know I had a ton of fun just doing the books themselves, and it gave, and it helped me have structure and taught me how to put together.
Yeah. So, what kind of stories were you inventing in your head? Were they, as opposed, like space opera, or was it hard sci-fi? What was it that you think you were drawn to the most?
I don't know if it was hard sci-fi,
mm-hmm.
because while I was watching Trek, and then later on, you'd see these other TV shows like Logan, the TV version of Logan's Run, or The Wizard, or Battlestar Galactica, the first version,
mm-hmm.
and or what, Lucan, or Phoenix, or the Phoenix. All these,
mm-hmm.
All these obscure, for a lot of people, obscure shows. They never heard of them, but these were the shows I was growing up on. It was the same thing, with Saturday morning cartoons. It was whatever I could get my hands on. But for the most part, the stories were kind of comic bookish, because they weren't particularly hard sci-fi. I didn't have that kind of grounding.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that that as long as my imagination was working, what the heck, I was going to have fun.
And let's talk about the people around you. You mentioned
mm-hmm.
that you were in a bunch of sci-fi based groups.
Mm-hmm.
Did those people provide you with any kind of encouragement, or even, something to aspire to? What was going on in your immediate universe that kind of fed this for you, or was it completely self-contained and self-maintained?
Oh, never self-contained. I'm not that brilliant. Well, hey, it's the truth. I'm not that brilliant. I've always said my friends make me smarter.
Okay.
But the thing was, I was in a Star Trek club. I was in a
mm-hmm.
role-playing game group. And I was in a writers group, and we trade stories back and forth. As a matter of fact, that was the writers group and the role-playing game group was really where I met James, because when he showed up, it's like, I met him, and and I realized this guy had serious ambitions, and it was cool to hang out with him, because I knew that if I could just hang with this guy and learn, and hopefully learn what he's learning, it was going to be even better, because it gave me a chance to grow as a person. The role-playing game thing made me think on my feet. I would go ahead and I got seriously crazy into it. I went because we were using GURPS, the Generic Universal Role Playing System. Mm-hmm. I got heavily into that, and so I started buying module books, and I'd read that, and I'd see how the structures were working. I'd also buy the novels. I'd also and also got into things like Shadowrun a little later, and other role-playing games. I just like to read them because they were fascinating just to see how they built these worlds and how they created these characters. Mm-hmm. And they gave me insight on how to do it even better than than when I was thinking of, because the stuff I was doing, that was okay. But as I got more and more into the gaming side and the novel side and everything, it was stuff that just sort of kicked me in the head and put everything into a different gear. And mm-hmm. I would write short stories or make up short stories, and I'd tell myself. And so that was how I really got into writing, because as long as I knew I could just create this stuff and do this stuff and have fun with this stuff, that was the coolest thing in the world,
Yeah. And so, I mean, it sounds like you were self-teaching. You were actually studying how other people did things, how stories got told, how maybe plots got manufactured. Mm-hmm. Did you have any formal kind of training other than learning on the fly? Your peers helping you and things like that.
Well, there was, like I said, I did a few years at City College, and I took writing courses.
Oh, okay.
And and half the fun would be is like, you'd get, the guy would throw out, okay, you get 25 words. Can you write on a subject? And the whole thing was, and this is before Seinfeld was Seinfeld, I was like in a full-on panic, and then I suddenly realized I don't have anything to write about. So that's what mm-hmm. I wrote about. And I sat there and I figured out 25 words to say that I don't have anything to write about. I would sit there and go, okay, I know I have an assignment. I'm supposed to write about something, but I don't have anything to write. I have nothing to write about. So therefore, this nothing is something, and that something is nothing, but it's all I got. So that nothing has to be something. So therefore, I will write about the nothing, which is something.
So it sounds like it was a cool blend of Seinfeld and Twitter.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, because, you'd sit there and you realize that if you have to do it within a limited space,
right,
you have to get in, out, and have it make as much sense as possible.
Mm-hmm. And we had an exercise like that in my writing group, where mm-hmm. and I think we stole it from Oprah. I don't know because I never watched Oprah, but it was like a 6 words thing where you had mm-hmm. to take 6 words or express mm-hmm. something in 6 words.
Right.
And I think those exercises do you well because, first of all, it forces you to think in terms of really focusing your creativity on content in such mm-hmm. a really concentrated way that
right.
It can't help but help you become to express yourself better, to use your words better. And exactly. So, I mean, that sounds brilliant, man. I mean, to use those exercises does help. I mean, that's why they're used in classrooms.
Yeah. And you have to also understand something. I read something where it said, if you can express the idea for your story in 3 words, you know what the story's about.
Ooh, you said that, and I'm going to let everybody in on a secret. I just so that you know, I write. I wrote a trilogy, and right. it talks about it tells a story. And I'm sorry, this is not just self promotion, but what you said is something that has lived with me. ever since I started writing. And the plot of my trilogy is what happens in America when the country finds out that black folks have been secretly living on the backside of the moon since before Neil Armstrong got there. And
when that messed you up.
Yes. Here's the secret that I'm going to let everybody know. When I first started writing, when I would back up my files, I had a working title. Okay? And please don't think harsh of me, but my working title was, and I don't say this to offend anybody, but this is just what my working title was until I realized that I couldn't get it published under that name. But when you talk about 3 words, the working title for my first book was Niggas in Space. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, you can't publish that because no reputable publisher is going to do that. Second of all,
they're not going to take the blow.
And they're not going to take me seriously. And the other thing was, even if they did publish it, no white folks would read it on the bus. Nobody wants to get ass kicking over that. So it forced me to think more maturely about the art of writing. But to be able to distill it down to 3 words or 6 words and still convey content is a worthy exercise that I think every single author should do. I mean, look at what they talk about your elevator pitch. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I think everybody should, because ultimately, if you can sit there and break your story down. I mean, I've got one story that I've already broken down, and it's about a group of people who find from 4 different worlds who find themselves having to stop a guy from taking something that's in their world and using it to conquer the galaxy. Well, the whole thing, they have to get those items back to rebuild their worlds, and it all broke down to 4 to restore. And the moment I had that, that's like, oh, that's it. That's it, because it really, if you can describe that story in as few words as possible, you know what you're talking about,
Yeah, there was a phrase in Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, and the phrase was distilling nuance from something of vapor, distilling nuance from the substance of vapor or something like that. And I think that's the essence of being able to tell a story, because that's what you're doing. You're trying to take your ideas and convey them in a compelling way that people not only understand, but that they like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what other kinds of exercises did you find most helpful for your process?
Can you tell something of a story? Can you tell a story? Not something of a story. Can you tell a story in 200 words or less? Okay. Yeah. Can you get really concise and have a beginning, middle, or end, and have it make sense for you? And the moment that you can figure it out, if you can say, this is what this person's about, or this is what this character's about, you can then write as many words as you want, but as long as you have the anchor, you can go forward any which way you want to.
And did you get to play those kinds of exercises off of the other people in your writing group?
No, not really. We would sit there and we'd look at it, and we'd say yes or no. Because it was, or if we thought that, they were a better writer than what they gave up, what they turned in, that was important, because we all knew that we could be excited. But if the story didn't excite us, if what they put in our hands was something that just made us go, we let them know. And that was the coolest thing, because we would go back and forth, and make the story matter to each other, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. You have to make it matter. At least if it doesn't matter to you, why is it going to matter to anybody else, you know?
There is that, yeah. And that's very crucial, too. One of the things that I would like to share with other people is I was in a writing group, and one of the things that we did was we would critique other people's writing, but we didn't allow the author to defend their work because there really is no defense. When somebody says to you, I got X, Y, and Z out of your writing, you can't tell them how they were wrong because it makes no sense. If somebody says, this is what I got out of it, and you want to argue with them, it doesn't make sense because essentially they're telling you, well, this is the way you wrote it, this is what I got. And then if you want to tell them how wrong they were, and then how are you going to go home with everybody who has your work and explain to them the right way to read it? Yeah. So that's something. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say that comedian Mort Saul would always end his shows with thank you for individual perception. Mm-hmm. Because that's all you could really do is just sit there and bring whatever you've got to the table.
Right.
You know? And writing requires you to come into writing requires you that once you're in your head, you put it down on the page, you got to realize it's not in your head anymore. So you don't know what you meant by that. You have to spell it out in the story, in the writing, what you're trying to do. I mean, I know that when I go back to reread something, if it's not clear, at least to me, then I have to go and change it, you know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly editing. If I've dropped words, letters, if I hit something, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, this makes no sense. Then I have to go back. Now, once I turn it over to somebody else, they're bringing their perception to it. And if I haven't made it clear to other people, it ain't there. It's like being at the bus. It's like the bus stop, The bus is there, picks up its passengers and starts pulling away, and here you are running, yelling like an idiot. Hey, stop. One, the driver don't hear you. Other people may not see you and tell the driver to stop for you. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure you're at that bus stop to get on the bus. Writing's the same way. If your ideas aren't there, you can't come back later and say to somebody, well, this is what I meant. Right. It has to be clear.
That's true.
I know.
That's exactly it.
I know that when James Jones gave me the story we're going to bring out next of reunions, it had tons of corrections of these two professional authors. And believe me, if they could spot that stuff, somebody else is going to spot it. So so if you cannot correct it and make it clear, and
the essence of writing is communication, and here's the thing about writing, and people find it unusually. They don't find it so much in the art of writing, but let's take when people are in chat across the internet. Right. There's so much potential for being misunderstood. You see people getting offended all the time because they think that somebody meant something that wasn't, or meant something that was negative, but it was just poorly expressed. And the essence of writing, is being able to paint that visual picture in words. And it's not easy. It's not great. We all know good writers. We all know bad writers. And I think the best of us are probably going to be learning for the rest of our lives. If
it's a constant learning process. Yeah, it's a constant learning process, and for sure, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you do get published or how many times people see your stuff, you're still a student, you know? And sometimes, yeah, I think I got to go back to school, you know, and pick up on some of that stuff I haven't picked up on. But right. I do know that when I do read something or do watch something or do listen to something, because I know I've listened to like old radio shows, you know, like Tom Corbett's Space Cadet. I know that's corny, but if you listen to those old shows, it's like, since it's all words, all verbal words, you have to be clear. I mean, you have to be clear to the nth degree, because you can't pull it. I mean, it's funny because and I'm going to relate this to something else. I love animation. Okay, love animation, and I've got two different versions of a book called The Flasher Story by Leslie Kavaja. Terrific book if you're ever interested. But the whole thing is this wonderful line that Max Flasher said to somebody, to this one professor, I forget his name, but they were doing a silent feature about the Einstein's theory of relativity, okay, from a cartoon studio, okay, that did Coco the Clown and Betty Boop. The guy basically said, "Look, professor, if I'm reading your book, I can always go back and reread it again if I didn't understand it. But if you're watching a movie, I can't pull the film back and watch it again. You know, that only happens if you're like, say, doing Netflix or you're watching a DVD. You know, then you can go back over and over again. But ultimately, if you're in a theater, if those guys who've written that script are not clear on the first shot at this screenplay, and they haven't made it clear to the actors, they haven't made it clear to the director, one, that's going to be a lousy movie. You know, well, it doesn't matter.
That's true. You know? And then when you take the converse, H.G. Wells is his broadcast of War of the Worlds. You know, where people thought that Martians really were landing in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. You know, and again, the man was a consummate storyteller, and obviously, you know, there was a certain amount of gullibility there. There was there were a lot of things that contributed to the fact that people thought that was actually happening. Right. But it still all comes down to the essence of storytelling.
You know,
so
and it's for everybody. It's the same thing for everybody. I mean, if you aren't making it clear, and you know, it doesn't matter what you meant or what you think you said. If it's not clear, you have to go back and make sure that the writing is clear. You know.
Let's talk about process a little bit. I mean, you've talked about, you know, the necessity for making it clear. When you're writing, do you write? Let's say, okay, let's take for example, you've got four corners,
right?
All right, and that's give us a little kind of an overview of Four Corners. What's the story about?
Well, let's see. Just after World War II, around 1945 or so, a small town in Georgia finds that it's birthing four-armed children. It happened on the black side of town first, then it happens on the white side of town, and then eventually these guys have to come together and acknowledge that this is happening to everybody, and there's something common that's happening. And because there are no experts that can tell them what to do about it, they become the experts.
Okay, so I'll just slowly walk it through. Okay, as I'm not sure. Is there a way that you can convey what was the inspiration for the story, and then we'll talk about your process of how you constructed that story.
Oh, well, that's real simple. I was a big fan at the time, back in the day, of the X-Men comics.
Okay, sure.
And Chris Claremont was writing now. Now, he's a good writer. We both know that. Here's the problem with it. He'd written three mega events that went across all X titles. I think it spilled over into other books. But it was a year-long story. One was called Fall of the Mutants, and the other one was Extinction Factor, and I think there was a third one. Well, I had a problem with it. All three of them were about the same thing. Oh, everybody's trying to kill us. Everybody's trying to destroy us. And I kept thinking, wait a minute. What? Wait a minute. That's not going to be true. Not everybody's going to want to kill you. Not everybody wants to hate you. There are people that love their children despite everything. You know? I mean...
despite being born with 4 arms?
Yeah. They love their children. They realize that, yes, something's happening, and a lot of them thought, okay, if God is doing this to me, this is my road to hoe. That I have to deal with this. And since it was happening, it happened to the black side of town first. Then it happens to the white side of town, and then eventually, somewhere in the middle, there are two characters that are instrumental to helping the town keep its sanity. One was a guy named Dr. Murdoch, and the other one was Mama Dozier. Now, Mama Dozier is black. She's a woman, and she's taking in all these black kids, and those whites who are dropping, when whites find out, oh, she's taking those kids in, they drop them off, and they think, oh, they're not going to, they're never going to track us. Well, Mama D tracks them all down and says, okay, you want me to help take care of this child, you got to help pay for it. So she's in she takes over a big warehouse, cleans it up. She's growing vegetables and everything. She's got chickens on. She's got all this stuff, and she's raising these kids. And Doc Murdoch finds out about her, and starts to talk to her, and they start going together and working on this. And as they're going on and working on it, this is what, in the 50s or so, in the 60s or so, and they're trying to make sure that they are keeping their sanity, because this was scaring everybody. And eventually, around 1954 or so, these kids are about 10 years old, and they look at these adults and they tell them, look, all this segregation stuff is out. We don't have the time for it.
Right.
And so the black kids that Mama Dozier has raised, along with the white children she's gotten hold of, they all see each other as brother and sister, or siblings to some great degree.
Sure.
Doc Murdoch's roughly the same way. They've got people that are helping them, of course. But the story mostly focuses on them, and it focuses on a guy named Cody Maccabee, who ends up hitting a slick patch. I'm assuming it's black ice, because I didn't know it at the time. And he trashes his truck, and he gets taken in. And it turns out the government's got a Department of Unusual Phenomena, and Cody qualifies, because they find out he's got 4 arms. They examine the heck out of him. They find out he's from that little town in Georgia. They go to the town. The media discovers the town. They go nuts, and trying to having this big media blowout.
Sure.
Yeah. And and it's fun doing that, because and as I was writing it, I was laughing, because that would happen. That would happen. It wouldn't so much be a panic thing all the time. For many people, it would be stark curiosity. What's going on here? Is it happening?
If it happened today, it wouldn't be people being curious. It would be people going, okay, how do I make some money off of this?
Oh, there's that too. You know, there's that too, because Cody Maccabee, you know, he's being examined. His dad is being interviewed. The entire town's being brought out into the open, and there's no way they can stop it. And these guys just basically look at it and go, okay, we got to deal with this.
Yeah.
But it's a ton of fun to sit there and realize that, you know, wait a minute, we're not all scared of them, you know. And I know later on, as I started writing, I've got groups like Parents and Friends of Mutants. That's one of the support groups, you know. There's also, you know, radical groups that are coming up, but they're not in this book because I thought about all that stuff afterwards, and they might be in the next book. I don't know, but they'll be there. But, you know, when you think about it, people's main reaction isn't all the boogeyman. It's what's going on here, how do we cope, and how do we deal, you know?
Well, yeah, and for me, writing a story like that that has engaged the reality of our culture, you know, whether it be American or world culture, and you know, being able to take that worldview and then add something different to it. I mean, you look at some of the most successful sci-fi that's out there. You know, Jurassic Park is today how we would cope with like I don't know if it was 2 or 3. How do we cope with a Tyrannosaurus Rex running around San Diego?
Yeah, you know, how would you?
You know, yeah, exactly. But you know, you got these people, and there were a lot of sight gags in there. Obviously, you know, the Asians with the cameras taking the pictures, and but when you take, I think some of the most compelling stories you can tell are those stories that use elements of known memes that we live with every day, and then applying them to a unique situation. In a way that we haven't looked at it. And so, but you, the way you started out, you said that, okay, I was looking at X-Men, I was looking at this particular circumstance, and then I decided to apply my twist in today's reality to this story, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, let's face it, part of the fun, because at the time they were riding high, you know, you know, and I think, well, wait a minute, this is another story. I got another story called The Family Mark that's not going to be published just yet because we still have work to do on it. But part of the fun of that was finding out, okay, an alien's landed in 1936. He served in World War II. And now the late night talk shows are like, and, you know, this is about, 93, so Letterman and Leno are like high. And David Letterman does a top 10 list about why this guy fought in World War II. You know, and Jay Leno comes out, tells a joke about, oh yeah, Dad, this is my boyfriend. He's got green blood, and he fought in World War II. Yes, Dad, it was on our side. You know, so it goes like that. You know, you're going to have that sort of craziness because if we're not willing to sit there and acknowledge all the goofy stuff that can happen. You know, and I've seen, you know, and I'll go through a comic book and I'll see somebody switch up the names, you know, like magician David Copperfield in the comic book becomes magician Oliver Twist, and his girlfriend is what, Gloria Shotzi, something like that, you know. So, you know, it's constant. It's constant. If you're not paying attention to the real world, you're missing these wonderful opportunities to spice up the story because that way you don't get bored with it. And when you go back and you read it again, you can have that chuckle and then, you know, make whatever corrections you got to make. But I do know that, like, you know, with Four Corners, I know that everybody was wondering what the heck was going on trying to do it. And at the time, I was kind of like kicked off a televangelist. because here they were making these big promises, and God don't work like that. If you've read the Bible, God don't work like that. This is how really it's about how do you act toward other people? Can you be a better man or woman? And and I ended up in Four Corners having this guy named Jerry Robertson. A little subtle there, right? And he's got a religious talk show called The Spirit Club, and we end up and we end up having a gathered group of mutants who are from their own churches from Four Corner invading that show, singing, and then the reverend preaches, and basically brings down the house because this guy is asking you why are you afraid, So it's really important that you sit there and you ask those questions for these characters, and you do what you can. You definitely want to build characters that are not only three-dimensional characters, but characters that you care about on some level, because once you do that, the reader has an emotional and a mental buy-in to the story. Oh yeah, always. And there's so many subtle parts, so many subtle constructs to the art of writing that a lot of these little things people don't notice or they don't learn right away. Which is one of the reasons why it's so helpful to either, if not take classes by somebody who's a very good writer or at least understands good writing, but to be able to read books that can help you not reinvent the wheel every time or go down dead ends, in your creative process that not only will hold you back, but might even dissuade you from going any further. Writing is tough because it's very hard for authors to not enfold within their personality the fact that their writing is not a direct reflection on their validation as a human being. A lot of writers who don't reach the stage where they can divorce themselves from criticism, and not take it to heart as, oh, somebody just criticized me, I must be terrible, or I'm no good, or I'm going to quit because I can't bear this kind of critique. So you don't know how long it took me to get over that. Well, it's tough, man. I mean, even now, I got a 1-star review on Amazon, okay? And when I saw it, at first I was pissed. I was pissed. Yeah. I was like, you don't know what and I went through whatever name Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grieving. Yeah. And then I realized when I read it, for what I wrote, it was the most perfect interview there. It was a white guy who said, oh, I can't get into your book. I can't get past the premise because it seems like a Saturday Night Live sketch to me. And under normal circumstances, I'd be upset because of the critique. But I stepped back. It took me a couple of days. I stepped back and I said, this is the most perfect review I have on what I've written. Because if a white man can't understand that African Americans would choose to leave their lives and go live on the moon away from all whites, if a white man can't understand that, this is a perfect review. This is a great illustration of the success of what I did. But like you said, when it's tough getting over the fact that people, when they critique you, are not devaluing you as a person. What they're doing is they're just saying that maybe what you wrote, like you said at the very beginning, wasn't clear or didn't tell the story that you wanted to tell. So that's pretty cool that you got to that stage. And you said it took you a long time. What kind of toughened you up
to give you that thicker skin to be able to look at it and go, okay, I see what they're getting at, rather than going, oh, they don't like me?
Well, I don't know if there's an actual process or a realization moment, but I do know at one point I looked at what I had written, and even I was going, maybe I didn't do it right.
Okay.
Because at one point you have to be your own harshest critic. You really do, because if you're not willing to tear yourself up and say, dude, you haven't done what you thought you did. You know, you have to sit back. You have to be able to step back, read it again, and go, oh, this really stinks. You know, this one bites. This bites a mountain. This bites Bandini Mountain from the bottom up. You know,
right?
You know, because ultimately you have to realize that even if you're writing for yourself, if you're not happy with it, how can anybody else be happy with it? You know?
Yeah. Somebody in the chat room mentioned that, you know, you have to be your own worst enemy because you have to be your harshest critic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I get from that, and that, you know, that's part of the quality assurance process.
Oh,
you know, if it doesn't pass your personal stink test, then probably it's not going to be the strong work or the compelling work that you want it to be.
Exactly.
So when you're writing, let's kind of dig into your process. When you're in full-on writing mode, is this a singular pursuit, or do you have people who you show your work to while it's in process to see what their perception is? Because you are very close. You know, we're all very close to what we write, which is why we can't be our own editors, because our brain will tell us what's supposed to be there rather than what is there. So in your process, how do you manage the process when you're in progress?
Well, the funny thing is like I know I don't give it over to anybody until I'm finished. But the thing is, I'll sit here and I will read it again and again. And for me, it's like I've written a series of Christmas short stories around mutants. Okay.
Okay.
And a lot of times, you know, sometimes they're shaggy dog stories. Sometimes sometimes I hope they're heartfelt. Sometimes they deal with religion. They have a religious component to it. But I do know that if I'm not enjoying the process, if I don't sit there and I've written something that makes me laugh out loud, or if I don't go at the end of the thing, oh dang, I did that. I really have to surprise myself, because if I don't, I'm not going to get. I don't feel the story, and I know that with stories that I have written, I'll sit here and go, oh man, I'm just not getting into it, or I'm not getting into it the way that I thought I was getting into it. I know, like, I had a major disaster a couple of years back when some schmo sat there and hit me with a virus and trashed my writing.
Oh, man.
Trashed my writing. You heard about the people who would get hit with this stuff. I got hit with it. And all I can do is hope that whoever did it gets what they deserve. But in some cases, I had to rewrite stories. I mean, I'd sent stories off. I'd sent many, well, let me correct that. I sent many of my Christmas stories off to Pat Williams, whom I'm associated with. She and to James, and you know, and so I knew those stories were safe. I knew most of my stories were safe. And I started deciding that, okay, after this debacle, I'm going to go ahead, clear the thing, because I didn't know anybody who could take this oblivion virus off, because I lost a lot of images, I lost a lot of words. And, I just went through everything and just dumped all this garbage. And
it's heartbreaking.
Oh man, it feels like your heart's been raked across, And I went back and I rewrote a lot of stuff. There were stories that I had written once, and I knew that if they came easily, these were stories that I truly loved and truly worked for me. But I do know there are a lot of short stories I've written that got trashed. Some novels got trashed, and I went back and I rewrote the novels. Pardon me. I'm going to go back, and I've got another story that got completely trashed. It was a follow-up to Four Corners that I had written. That was really cool, where at a Friday night football game, and a bunch of aliens that they helped went back, told their people, then came back and just took all those people that were at the football game and enslaved them. And I knew that was how do you get it. I knew this one was how do you turn the tables on master. That was how that was what I was thinking. So I know that particular story is going to be rewritten. I know as I'm currently writing, I've got a lot of stuff that's in that I'm going to go back and burn onto a disc because I've got to. Well,
you really should be doing that regularly anyway.
Yeah.
I've been in the IT industry for since 1970, and when I tell people that they have to have 3 backups for everything that they have, anything that's worth anything, you have to back it up 3 times. They look at me like I'm crazy until something happens. And then when something happens, they come to me in tears and go, hey, I need to recover this. I need to get this back. I need this.
And that's
I
harder.
Don't have any backup.
That's harder than anything.
Yeah,
I know.
And it's hard for me to, at first I want to be a hard ass and not sympathize with them. Go, well, you stupid. You disregarded my advice.
I get the French.
Yeah, you disregarded my advice, and my advice was not to upset you or to, in any way denigrate, how you do what you do. My advice was based on keeping you from breaking your own heart when something terrible happens. And what if you have a fire in your house, or somebody comes and they
and you gotta have
stuff.
You gotta have that stuff.
One place. Well, let me give everybody who's listening some advice. One of the places where I store all my files, and I know how paranoid black people are. They won't store their files any place because they think no matter where they put it, somebody's going to get their stuff, steal it, and they're going to publish it.
Yeah.
That happens a lot less frequently than anybody would ever suspect. But one of the places I store my stuff is at the Mega Upload site, which is from Kim.com, the guy who the U.S. is going to try to extradite for copyright infringement because he had mega uploads or whatever, and people were hiding or storing and sharing things illegally. But I like their encryption. I like the fact that that I can store 5 gigs of stuff, which is a literal ton of data up there, because it's nice to have it both on DVD or CD, depending upon how much data you have, and having it in the cloud. And sometimes your paranoia can kind of mess you up, because if you think the only place that you can store stuff where it's safe is on your computer, computers break.
Yeah.
And so how much of your stuff how much of your stuff, like in percentage-wise, do you think you've managed to, your intellectual property, how much of it have you managed to recover or redo? Because it sounds like it was a fairly big loss for you.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm working with a friend right now, and he's working on a web series. And when that thing hit, it just trashed everything. It trashed this one drive, that I needed to get the stuff back. And it cost me like $300, you know.
That's pretty cheap. Normally it's about $1,200.
Yeah. And I got lucky. You know, so I got very lucky. So at this point, I know I'm going to go ahead and get another USB drive and just take everything and shunt it over, take everything I care about and shunt over to there, and make sure I have it. But I do know one thing's for sure. You have to decide whether or not you're going to protect your backside, because you cannot afford to sit here and pretend nothing's going to happen. You know, it's that boastful, it's that bragging, boastful kind of strain we get into, and we're so dumb that way. I mean, you know, I'm not dissing anybody, but we are dumb that way because we think it's never going to happen to me, and when it does happen, you're like, well, you know, you know, because I'm like working with a friend of mine, a guy I don't know if you know the name, but his name's Gerald McNeil, and we were at high school together. And 1 year out of high school, the guy was working at the old Hanna-Barbera animation studio. Okay. And, you know, and he's also been at like Filmation, he's done Disney, he's done all these studios as an animator. And, you know, and one of the joys that I had was the opportunity to go over to his house, and we just spend the day, and he'd work on his stuff. And I'd get to see like model sheets and, you know, on occasion the scripts and everything to these shows. And it was tons of fun. I mean, you know, it was tons of fun. I mean, that made me want to go out and get scripts to TV shows, you know, just to read them and to see how they were constructed, you know. And it's, you know, it's the same thing when, you know, when you're looking at those scripts, and, you know, I knew all these places in Hollywood where I could get it when I was healthier. You know, I knew all these places in Hollywood where I was healthier, and I could buy scripts. So I would buy a script to see what kind of thinking went into the show or movie. And it was fun to read. It's the same thing when, you know, you buy a role-playing game module, you know, role-playing game book module, and you're sitting there and you're looking at how they do it, and you realize that these guys are very good writers because they know that if you're going to follow their story, you have to know what they're talking about. And, you know, so I would get stuff and be completely floored by the quality of the writing. You know, a lot of people may say that, you know, television's a medium, it's neither rare or well done, but if you think about it, the best TV shows are very well done because they have to engage you week after week with the same characters and essentially the same basic plot. And if that's what you're going to be doing, then you have to be a good writer because you have to keep us engaged, you know?
Well, here's a good example. You know, people talk about sci-fi films not being, you know, engaging and things like that. And let's take one franchise that was pretty popular. Let's take the Alien franchise.
Right.
Okay? Every single Alien movie has exactly the identical plot. Every single one. But they tell that story in such a different way that you are engaged. You know, people are engaged. Oh, hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksci-fi.com website. This is the January 29th edition, kind of leaving out the first month of 2016 of what's going to be a very, very, very political year. Our special guest tonight is Kenneth Strickland. He's the author and co-publisher of Four Corners.
How you doing?
If I go, because if you're picking this up as a podcast, go ahead and do a search for him on Amazon.com and take a look at his work. And for those of you who are interested in knowing more about him, obviously stay tuned to the rest of the show. One of the things that, for me as an author, that was important for me was being able to do a plot that nobody else has done. Yeah, somebody says, yeah, Barnes & Noble, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we can find him. All we have to do is put his ass in Google. Google knows everything. So everybody just calm the F down. We'll find Kenneth if we need to look for him. You know, that's why I'm not on Facebook as myself, because it does make it too damn easy for people to find you. You know, like the police or, you know, mothers of your errant children from 2 decades back, whatever. But anyway, I mean, we'll get past that. But the thing is, you know, when you talk about the process of creativity, you know, you seem drawn to the mutant genre, but it also seems like you want to write in terms of our current culture and how that affects our current culture. Let me ask you this. Does race play a part in what you write? You know, for a lot of black sci-fi people, it does. For what you've written, because it does sound like you obviously delineate race, because in Four Corners, you know, first the black folks in the town are having their children born, you know, that are mutations, and then the white part of town, their children are born with a mutation, and then they have to figure out how to get along together. So, I mean, when you look at how you wrote that story, was you know, how did you want to put the racial component in there, or how did you want to use it in a way that helped drive the story?
Well, part of it was the fact that this was with the mutants in Four Corners, their whole thing was they weren't going to have the time, or at least they didn't think they had the time to engage in the kind of segregation that was going on, because they were realizing that if this thing was happening to everybody, exactly what does skin color have to do with it? You know,
right? The enemy was not maintaining the cultural climate of the time. The enemy was whatever was making these mutations.
Yeah, and the fact is that Doc Murdoch, you know, sat there and searched, and he found, and he had ideas about it, and then he meets Mama Dozier, and it turns out that when she was distilling the water, you know, she was steam distilling the water, it would leave a residue. Well, she would scrape the residue out of the boiler, and she saved it. She didn't know why. She just knew that this had something to do with what she was dealing with. And and so when she meets Doc Murdoch, the two of them realize that, they're going toward the same thing. So therefore, they have to work together. So for Mama D and Doc Murdoch, there is no argument. They don't have time for segregation. They don't have time for racism. Well, the kids who grew up under Mama D, they don't have that time either. You know, and they tell the adults at the meeting they don't have the time. They can't afford it. We're too busy, you know, denying the fact that we've got 4 arms. We're too busy denying the fact that we have 4 arms, and you want us to sit here and tie ourselves up in knots over the color of skin? Get real.
Right. Yeah.
You know. So
it's transcendent of race. I mean, your obvious intent was transcendent of the kind of racial nonsense that we go through on a daily basis in our culture today.
Well, it was partially that. It was also the fact that, you know, somebody might have been a former Ku Klux Klan member, had kids, but under the circumstances, they were looking around and they were going, we really can't go outside of town to get married. So that in some cases the net got cast further out, and it was between, you know, it was, okay, the blacks we're going to end up having to get with the blacks are going to have to get with the whites, we're going to have kids together. You know, so if you think about it, Cody Mack is half, if you're talking race, Cody Mack is half white, half black. He can't. That's something that's normal to him. Many of the kids that he grew up with were the same way. So if anybody comes in there with any of their racial stuff, they're going to find a really cold audience.
Yeah, they're not going to find fertile ground for that kind of nonsense. Well, that's kind of cool. Now, do you have a pretty big arc for this series? I mean, how many volumes do you imagine you're going to be able to write for this series?
Ooh, oh man, that's crazy. Because right now I'm writing on a thing called Four Corners Diaspora, and I can tell you a little bit about that because I know I'm going to have to rework it. But it's basically Four Corners is throwing a big family reunion, as it were, a big party. And this is 200 years afterwards. And so they've been to planets. They've been to multiple planets. They've got satellites they're working on. The federal government is still going crazy because they can't get on those satellites. They're not allowed on those worlds. And but here's this town having this big party for these half alien, half mutant kids, half alien, half mutant people. But that's just one part of it. So that's not good. That I need to go back and I need to figure out my second story. But Four Corners Diaspora is the one that came up. But I know the second story is going to have something to do with them having to deal with the rest of the world and the rest of the country because they have to,
This spreads, just a procedural question, this spreads outside Four Corners and actually hits the country?
Oh, yeah. Because ultimately Four Corners decides that they're going to go and search the Southeast where they are and find out if there are many mutants out there. They know they're going to. They know they have to go and search throughout the rest of the country. As a matter of fact, I did a thing. I've done a thing. I'm still working on it. Where I took a map, divided it up in sections. Midwest, Northwest, Northeast, Southwest, Midwest, Northwest, Alaska, and Hawaii, and said this is the kind of mutants that are in these particular areas. So I'm still working on it, So the stuff is coming along. It's just not. I don't know when I'm going to be done with it. It's a very cool situation where you end up realizing that these guys are people and they have to live in this country. So now what happens as they're coming out? Are people losing their minds over this? Are people getting crazy? I've also got another thing where I know that when I go to do the Taraki story, it's going to be where these guys are discovered by another town, because I'm going to tie all this stuff together. But I've got another town in the family, Mark, in Northern California, and they rescue starships. So what do you do when you got to go and you find out that this town got a ship, saved the people, but they can't. But they're on the cusp. But the people they rescued are on the cusp of dying. They're claiming that they're taking the ship as salvage and that sort of thing. So it's going to be all sorts of stuff happening.
So you've got a broad arc to that you can sustain a multiple volume telling of your tale.
I certainly hope so. I think it's broad enough to work across many volumes. I hope many volumes, because I know that a lot of stuff is going to happen. I know that some of them are going to go to India, and being actually forearmed, it's going to be my goodness, Cali's for real,
Mm-hmm.
Their deities are for real, It's and I figure what the Japanese, when they see them, will lose their minds and just have a great deal of fun with the whole idea of these foreign people coming to Nippon. It's going to be all sorts of things where these guys go around the world. I know that in certain areas, mutants are not particularly welcome, and the
I don't have them in my home. I'll be honest with you. I'll meet them outside my house, but I don't want them up in my house.
Exactly. And they know that. That's the thing. They know that. So you also have societies that when a woman has a mutant child, that both the child and the mother are killed.
Yeah.
And,
so I mean that. Don't give too much away. But it sounds like you have very, very carefully thought out your world building.
Yeah.
And using the elements of current culture, but also, you have to put together a whole mindset of the kind of
history,
personality, and culture of the mutants themselves, because they're recent, they're new, but they also have an awareness of where they fit in today's culture. So this sounds like it's fun for you. Let me ask you this: if we look down the road a little bit, do you see yourself collaborating with other creatives who might want to write into your universe?
Hey, it's a party, It will most likely be a party, because ultimately you sit there and you read what somebody's written and you go, oh, dang, they painted me into a corner. Then the exercise is, one, how do I expand on what they've written? And two, how do I get out the corner?
Yeah.
I may have given you a plot. I may have given you plots and ideas, maybe, but I got to tell you, nobody's going to write it the same way. So I'm not afraid of that.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people who's so scared that, oh, you heard my plot, I got to keep that. There are no such thing. There's no such thing as a brand new plot, because there's maybe most plots are a half dozen. At best,
there is that one.
Dozen.
There is that one where the black folks made it to the moon before Neil Armstrong did. That was unique.
Yeah.
But you're right.
I'm gonna hurt your feeling now. You know where that might not quite be so new? Because from what I've been reading, from what I've been seeing, there are people who will tell you that blacks made it to America first. Oops.
Well, no, but in terms of writing speculative fiction, that's a new plot. It's taking something that is a twist on what, and that's a cool part of storytelling. The fact that to create a world where Africans came and settled America first, that's a good sci-fi story, or at least a speculative fiction story. One of my I can't remember the author because I'm old and I ain't got no ideas, no memory. Was a white man accumulated, a lot of wealth, and he was building a time machine so he could go back and make sure that the South won the Civil War. Yeah. And the person sent back to stop him was a black man who was not sure if he was a law enforcement agent, a time agent, or whatever. Like I said, I read this a long time ago. But thinking about, well, what would happen if the South had won? What would happen if Hitler had not committed suicide, or got burnt up by whoever burned him up? All of these. This is the essence of storytelling. Take something that is entirely plausible. What if we could find DNA in mosquitoes in amber and grow us some dinosaurs? So all of that coolness is the essence of great storytelling. And then now, when you look at the fact that they have quantified your type of writing, my type of writing, as Afrofuturism, to take African or African American centric stories and start spinning them out there, there's no doubt that we have more imagination than Hollywood or the publishers have been putting out there.
Because we're not tapped out, you know? I mean, that's the whole thing. We haven't been tapped out.
Exactly the same. Yeah, we are full of imagination. I mean, come on, how many Spider-Man reboots are we going to have?
I mean, thank you. I mean, I like Tobey Maguire, but I didn't bother with the next 3 reboots. Why should I? I've seen the story. You know, it's at one point you say, okay, liked it, not interested. But the thing about, say, the difference between, say, the 40s serial version, the 50s George Reeves version, the 70s Christopher Reeve version, and The Last Man of Steel, that's obvious. It's been generational, and there's been a shift in the thinking. So, therefore, it didn't feel necessarily old. The plot was old. I mean, come on. Scientists and wife figures out their planet's going to die. They get their kid off in time, and he grows up on Earth. I mean, it's the same thing. I can have 4 corners, do all this stuff, because, one, you have no idea where my thinking is. You have no idea where I'm going until you read it, So part of what has to happen is that we have to be courageous enough to sit there and say, this is what I'm going to do. And then take it to the next phase, whatever that phase will be. Because I know one of the things that really kind of scared me was I was on a bus, and I just said out loud, just absentmindedly, we really ought to have more creativity in what we're doing. We ought to have more originality. And this one old black dude looked at me and said, well, what is creativity and where do you get it? And I'm like, oh, my goodness. You have no idea. No wonder you're sitting in the back of the bus, in the corner of the absolute back seat, because you can't imagine yourself as the driver. I mean, there's only 2 places on a bus.
Well, I mean, that's true. But, when you look at American culture, let's take it over the last 300 years, over the last 400 years, has been pretty complex in that it was set up as a slave nation. Slaves pretty much built this nation, and we're talking about not just black slaves. We had black slaves, we had Asian slaves, we brought the Irish over, and they were slaves, and so when you color a culture that way, and I use the word color deliberately, what it does is it's fodder for what if. What if? Like you said, what if Africans settled here first? Yeah. What if they cut a deal and were cooperative with the native peoples? Yeah. Well, the first thing I think of is, white folks would have gotten their asses kicked coming in here trying to misbehave the way that they did do it. And so that creates a dichotomy where you can present new ideas in a nuanced story that people might want to read, because they go, what if, I mean, really, that is the core of creativity, those 2 words. What if pushes you and makes you think about it and makes you dream about it. I mean, all I know is like when when I was a kid, black superheroes didn't exist as far as I knew, because I hadn't seen the Black Panther, and when I finally saw one, it was Captain America issue number 60 back in the 70s, and it had Sam Wilson the Falcon for the first time in his green and gold uniform. I read the daylights out of that issue, but it also started to, you may not be able to say it immediately, but there's the seed planted, and it starts growing in the back of your head. I remember also, this is in the 70s as well,
I was at a comic convention, comic sci-fi convention out at this hotel at the airport, and I was at a dealer's table looking over the goods, and right next to me was this guy dressed as a Vulcan, looked great. Perfect ears. Everything was perfect on him. The eyebrows were right. The ears were right. The costume was right. And he was black. And this is like, 1976? Early 76? I mean, that messes you up. That kicks your head into gear. Because it suddenly says, if he has the courage to do it, I could do that. And
well, that's true.
And the realization that you're going to have people who are critical of you cosplaying what was a white superhero or a white character in a sci-fi thing, that's crazy, I mean, that may be crazy to my mind, because ultimately you have, you sit back and you look at things like X-Men, and, it's created in 1963. And Professor X and Magneto are having the same argument that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X are having. How do we go forward as a people? And when you start acknowledging that's happening, and you start recognizing that may be something that you're going to get into, because you can't just sit back and go, well, I can't write about it. Yes, you can, because you have opinions about it. You have a viewpoint on it. You have a notion about it that says this could happen this way, or this might happen this way, or as an African American person, I can be this character. I'll put on the costume.
Well, and the thing is, recognizing the fact that people's, not their memory, but their imagination is sparked by, I think most imagination is sparked by something people see, and it doesn't have to be the thing that they're imagining. But let's take a look at what we have a current meme right now that is just so fantastic. We have kids out there, black kids out there right now who have grown up with, who have never seen a white president of the United States.
Exactly.
And they have never seen, they didn't see George W. They didn't see any of that. All they have grown up with, and they've gone to school and gone through, Black History Month and things like that.
Yeah.
But they've got, but their example, well, it's President Obama. That's their example, and that helps them dream big on a personal scale. But then to be able to embrace, like you said in cosplay, embrace maybe what normally might have been something white, but if they didn't look at it as white or black, they looked at it as a cool character. So there's a lot of people, a lot of white folks who didn't look at Worf in Star Trek as a black guy.
Yeah.
I was at the Consumer Electronics Show at the McCormick Place, and so Michael Dorn is there signing autographs, and they're just, the majority of the people waiting for his signature and things like that are white.
Yeah.
But he played such a cool character that it transcended race.
Yeah. And I think also there's something else. Okay, one of the DC movies that are supposed to be coming out is the Green Lantern Corps. Now, you know darn well they're going to have Hal Jordan, but they're also going to have John Stewart. Why? Because for 10 years, this character has been the Green Lantern that these kids grew up with. Unless they read the comic books, unless they read the comic books, most kids know John Stewart, know Green Lantern to be black.
Right.
They don't know Guy Gardner until you go into, until they go into the Batman Brave and Bold episodes where they have Guy Gardner, because they know that Batman plays off well with somebody who's such a dork, Mm-hmm. But we all know that the cruel Green Lantern is John Stewart. But we also know that it is possible that you too can be that hero. I mean, there are, there's guys like Bill Johnson who cosplays back east, because I'm on the West Coast. I don't get to see this stuff.
Sure.
Who's cosplayed Hawkman, and I thought, how cool was that? Because it got the race right. It got the race right. That he's an African, mm-hmm. and and then when you go and you see those this year's crossover episodes, and you see Khufu, and you can clearly tell he's African American. But it's such a cool conceit to actually have this character that way. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, the old 60s Filmation, Hawkman cartoons and Green Lantern cartoons, and, the Super Friends from the from the 70s, But the idea that this stuff is going to sit here and make you go, whoa, this is cool. And they didn't have to think it up, it was there. And I think that's
already. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's half the fun of really just watching a lot of stuff. Because, I mean, stuff that kicked me in the head, first it's like Star Trek, with Lieutenant Uhura, and then we go into Battlestar Galactica, and you got Colonel Ty and Lieutenant Boomer, and you're like going, and then they keep throwing other black characters, and your mind is going, whoa. Okay.
Dude, for me, Mission Impossible. Greg Morris, Mission Impossible.
Hey, major coup.
He could build anything. He could build anything, and he was cool. He wasn't angry. He was just did his job. Cool. Yeah.
The other one, and I got another one for you, about the same time, and this is like a year before Fat Albert hits the air. Josie and the Pussycats, Valerie. Remember how
I didn't get to check that out. I admit I didn't check that out, but I'm taking your word for it. But they had a black cast member in the cartoon?
Yeah. In Josie and the Pussycats, they had a black cast member, and she, of course, made it to the comic books. So the funny part about it is like, Valerie was the one that came up with the Rube Goldberg, I think you know that name, the Rube Goldberg contraptions that help them deal with the villain, in the story, that week's story, and it was really cool. I mean, to see that was a major kick in the head, because it allowed you to sit there and say, I could do that. I can. It's very funny because I've got some people who like, I like Valerie too, but why are you so excited about it? I said, because she made me think I could do it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with Battlestar Galactica. I mean, come on, Boomer flying one of the Vipers. Heck, I had a Viper in my head. I had a Viper in my head. I had the gun,
And in Star Trek, we had a black woman on the bridge.
Yeah, and she's part of the command crew. Yep. And you're sitting up here realizing, whoa, that's intense. And I like the fact that, and I love the story she tells about having met Martin Luther King Jr., and King tells her, despite the fact that you're not getting what you want, you are what we need at this moment. Yeah.
And how do you quit behind that? How do you tell them, And it's good that she stayed, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, because it let's face it. I love Lieutenant Uhura. Here's this beautiful woman. I don't even have to tell you the color. It's like, here's this beautiful woman, period.
Mm-hmm.
Who made you go, okay, let me place a call. Can I get a call to Miss? Can I go to call to Lady Uhura? and see if we can go check out a dinner or two on Saturday, And it's stuff like that helps kick your imagination into overdrive, because you see the examples. And a lot of people think that, well, that's it, we don't need to do anymore. No, they're the example. You're the next step, And that's what that whole thing is about. I mean, King had that right. She was going to inspire people. And, maybe not everybody, but the ones who got inspired would say, yeah, I'm doing this because I saw Lieutenant Uhura,
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm doing this because I saw Boomer, I saw Ty, or I saw people doing stuff that, used to be reserved for only one group. But, it's always generational in many cases, these shifts, because ultimately, the guys who did it the first time, yeah, they're all white. Of course they're all white. They're the ones who have the access to the equipment, to the means of doing it. And now that we have access, I mean, I'm sorry, if you are not taking advantage of all the stuff that's out there, okay, all the possibilities that are out there, and trying to do something with it, then you're wrong, You have to.
Either that, or you're just lazy, or you're just not paying attention. But you're right; it is wrong.
Yeah. Because I mean, I'm sorry. The equipment's there, the information's there, and if you're not taking advantage of it, you're wrong. I mean, that's why I hooked up with James, because the guy was willing to go as far as he did. I mean, you got to understand something. When I started learning about animation, and this is how I did it, I went to the library and I looked up filmmaking, and then I looked up the stuff about animation if they had it in there. And the first book that I saw anything about it had this homemade setup for homemade animation, where they had an 8mm camera, 2 light bulbs on an upright wood piece, and on the bottom wood piece they had a stack of paper. And I'm like, whoa, I can do that. And you got to understand that if you've got a computer and you're not checking out both the free programs and the low-cost programs, you're not finding out about the drawing tablets if you're an artist, if you're not learning how to do the CGI, if you're not learning how to do the effects and the stuff, if you're not going out of your way to buy a camera and to learn how to use it, if you're not learning how to go in and use the information that's out there, it's all out there. We have no excuses anymore,
And the barrier to participate gets lower and lower every year because the tools become cheaper and cheaper.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, you start with the freebies, you go up to the next level, the next level after that, and then the ultimate stuff if you can afford it,
Yeah. And that's good too, because when we get to schools today, schools are suffering because somehow conservatives have convinced the stupid people in America that it's teachers and public sector workers who are responsible for the financial woes in this country. Or
people who are like, who are like on Social Security or something. Excuse me? The whole meme is that everyone who's on assistance is non-white, when in fact, the majority of people in this country are white, and they're the majority on aid, on the thing. And, exactly. And amazing enough, they're in the red states. They're in the red states, for the most part.
Well, the red states do take a disproportionate amount of tax money in order to, to prop up these See, I can't use the word worthless because that's all, a really bad value judgment.
No, but nobody's really worthless. What they haven't done is discover their own worth.
Well, but here's the thing. We have so many kids today who have great imaginations. And part of what makes their imaginations so great is what they see going on. I mean, stop and think about how many kids who are doing their first short movie, they do it about a vampire, or they do it about, a space monster or something like that, because these things are captivating their minds.
Yeah.
I mentioned it a few weeks back, but one of the most creative or one of the most exciting things that happened in motion pictures was the Blair Witch Project. I think that film cost about $0.05, but it was so different that everybody flocked to it because it was something they had never seen before. And that's the essence of really cool storytelling. If you can tell a story that's never been told before or in a way that's never been told, you're going to captivate people's attention, and hopefully, a lot of that is young kids. Let me ask you this. Do you do much outreach to kids right now, or is this something you're going to do later? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but go ahead. Yeah, tell us.
Well, right now I'm physically not all that able to get out. I mean, I am on disability, but I do know this. When I have talked to a young one, and I said, don't ever quit. I mean, I will tell people in church, don't quit. Don't ever quit. Don't ever stop trying, because ultimately, when you get right down to it, it is our imagination that will save us. It's never, the status quo has very little use for really smart people, because they don't know how to control them. And when you have people who are working to shut down the imaginative or the creative and say, well, nobody we know has ever done. Well, it doesn't. It's not about you. It really isn't. It is about that person and what they have come up with, and where their line of sight is going. What it's how do they walk to that horizon? How are they trying to get to the horizon? Because we need to remember that we're all going to go to the horizon at one point. We have to. That horizon is where the new ideas are. The new creativity requires you to get involved. It's not just being a community organizer or something. It's also taking part in your own life.
Well, Isaac Asimov has a quote that I think encompasses the whole idea behind, being creative and a creative movement, especially in speculative fiction. And he said, individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today. But the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. And I think what he's talking about is the power of imagination. Yes, once you have the imagination, you still have to generate the follow-through, or maybe excite other people so that they get behind your idea because it's a good idea. But
look at it this way. Considering I'm talking to you via a handheld computer, a comm
which
device,
has more power in it than what they needed to take the people to the moon and back.
Exactly. And it's the same thing. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at my my box, my computer, and it's got it's got major power. I mean, who knew, when they started with personal computers back in the day, that we'd end up having computers where you can have, 2, 4, 6, however many cores you have in your central processing unit. Who knew you were going to have, a video board? Who knew that you were going to have a flat screen TV? And the essence of this country, and I think the essence of this country is, can we imagine it? Can we build what's in our imaginations? Can we see the possibility? You have to remember, this entire country is one big act of imagination. Okay? It really is. It's one big taking the shot and seeing how it plays out. It's funny because I have on DVD a terrific series that was on the History Channel called The Story of Us. I don't know if you ever saw it, because I also like history. Okay. Well, The Story of Us is really simple. If you can find it, it's probably you can probably download it somewhere. But essentially, it's the history of this country. Now, it's not every little thing, and for those of you who are going to pick the nits, it's not every little thing, but it is it does tell you of certain things that you didn't see, that you might not have seen coming if you lived back then. Come on, the Erie Canal. Think about it. Here is this big, giant, man-made river that goes from the Great Lakes to New York City. And it opens up commerce. It ends up getting towns built alongside of it. And it's the same thing with, say, the Transcontinental Railroad. Come on. Here we are saying we're going to sit here and build this transport system that goes from California to back east and vice versa. And we're going to be able to go from there. Now, there's a lot of shenanigans that went on doing it, but hey, that's to be expected, But it's
but before that happened, people have to remember, if you wanted to go from New York to California, by the time the people showed up in California, it was a whole new set of people. That's how long it took. It was another generation that ended up showing up.
Yeah.
So the human spirit is something that you don't want to underestimate, and I think that us as creatives, one of the cool things one of the cool burdens we take on is trying to feed the imagination of the next generation.
Oh yeah, because let's face it, that the next generation is whether they know it or not, they're all looking up and around and asking questions and finding new answers. The old generation sits here and says, well, that's not the way we did it. And the new generation is going like, yeah, why should we do it that way? It's not working anymore. So for many people, the very idea that we're going to sit here and push a new vision, a new way of handling things, we have to recognize that we are not going to we're not going to have new people. We're not going to have the same old way of doing it. We can't. It's the same thing with the Iron Horse. When you look at the images of the first trains, those are a joke. But you start realizing that, okay, here's what they did. They sat there. They took reciprocating pistons. They took what were water pumps to get water out of mines and got them to burn, to make steam, and put it all together so they can propel something along a track. It's the same thing with automobiles. You sit here and you realize how it's the same technology, but we changed it up again. Right now, filmmaking is changing again, because I got to tell you, I used to be a security guard at one point.
Right. Okay.
And one of the posts I had was at a theater. Now, they had the typical 35 millimeters widescreen film, you know, Technicolor Dolby Sound film going in there. But they were also having films delivered on hard drives and projected. Okay? So the stuff is going to change. Everything changes. And it has to change. I mean, it's the same thing for blacks. We have to recognize that we're going to change, you know, and that the writing is going, and maybe some of that writing that we're doing is going to change everybody. Because I know, pardon me, I downloaded like Raising Dion, that comic book. Okay. And all I know is I'm also going to get a hard copy because I loved it. You know, it's the same thing with the Tuskegee Airs. I mean, if I was a kid and I saw that, my brain would be going boom all the time. But you know, one of the things I also saw as a kid was the comic book Brother Man from Big City Comics, and that blew my mind. You know, because suddenly here was this comic book produced by blacks about blacks. It was funny, nicely written. The art was nice. And, you know, when you sit there and you look at that, I mean, I can't find my original copy, so I'm going to have to go get the collected books. But that's another story. But, you know, the fact is that these things pushed my imagination, you know? Everything pushed their imagination. I mean, even Star Wars pushed my imagination because I remember back in '77, I had gone to the Chinese theater here in Hollywood, and I remember when the curtains parted and that first and the fanfare goes by, and and you read the crawl, and then the sound comes up of the ships over the ships, and I don't know why I did it, but, you know, the sound was coming from behind me and coming around me, and I looked up at the ceiling and followed the sound down to the screen, you know, because that messed me up. It was so wonderfully cool to see that situation, you know?
It was never been seen before.
I never saw it before. You know, I mean, the last science fiction movie I saw was a kind of cheesy one. I think it was American International released it. It was called The End of the World with John Saxon. And, of course, you know, the world dies at the end, but he and his girlfriend get away. But, you know, you sit here and you realize, you know, or what else? Laser Blast. I remember that one. And some you'd see cheesy stuff, but you'd also see great stuff if you could. But, you know, it's not like it's not like I saw everything.
Yeah, the first movie that I ever saw in a theater, and I think I was 5 or 6 years old, was Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I mean, that blew my mind. Yeah. And you know, I don't know if there were any black folks in it at all.
No, there weren't.
But the idea, I mean, at that time, and I only heard about it on TV because I wasn't reading as much, you know.
Yeah.
But they were talking about the Nautilus, our first atomic sub.
Yeah.
And then you see Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I hate to do this, but we're running out of time here.
Oh my goodness! Should have known.
Well, did it feel like 2 hours? Hell no.
No.
There you go.
We had, you know.
See, I'm good at this.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, anyway, hey, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
It was fun, you know. Ray Harryhausen. I had to mention that. I saw those films.
Oh yeah. Well, come on, man. When he did Jason and the Argonauts.
Yes.
And you had
Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Oh, all of those. I mean, Ray was great. I mean, that stop motion stuff was unbelievable. But all of those spark your imagination because it's stuff you've never seen before. And again, to what you said earlier,
it's stuff you don't forget.
it generates that what if, and the what if is the great driver of imagination.
Yeah.
For those of you who have listened this long, where just a recap, we've been talking to Kenneth Strickland, and you can look him up on Amazon.com. He's written the first in a series, Four Corners, and it's available on Kindle. Is it also available in hard copy, by the way?
Yes, it should be, because I know I got hard copies of it.
All right, cool.
It should be Kindle and hard copy, and you can get it at Barnes and Noble and Smashwords and Kobo, whole lot of good places.
Very cool. And then if you're going to be out and about, if you're going to be going to any conventions, anything like that, where people can see you, be sure to go to the events calendar at BSFS and put up where you're going to be, because I usually go there to see if there's anything happening in Chicago when I can get the ankle bracelet off and leave the house. So that's kind of cool. But you want to meet as many creatives as possible, or at least I do. I have the blessed fortune to be able to interview all these creatives who I never would have been able to talk to otherwise, and in many cases would never have known about. So I'm thankful for the site for being able to draw such diverse talent together, and for us to check things out. So for those of you who know other creatives who have not visited blacksciencefictionsociety.com,
Trust
drop
me,
them
I promote it.
Yes. Yeah.
I promote.
Have them take a look.
Yeah, I promote like crazy.
Yeah, and then for those of you who, James is saying you're going to be at WorldCon 2016, and you'll be at the Mythical Legends table. If I go there, I'm going to make James buy me lunch, so I might be at the table too, eating a sandwich. So, anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being on. I really appreciate it, Kenneth.
Well, thank you for having me.
We'll keep an eye on the things that you do. When new things come out, we definitely want to circle back and try to grab people so that they could keep us up to date on what they're doing. For those of you who listen to this live, I want to thank you, because it's nice checking out your comments in the chat room, and it's always gratifying to me to know that there are people interested in checking out this show. For those who pick this up as a podcast, this is or at least recorded live Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then, it's available on the internet. We have people from South Africa every now and then who drop in. People from West Africa. Someone from who I happen to know personally over in England. So this is kind of a great place to look for new creative endeavor, new creative content, and offer to put your own stuff up here. If people are brand new at doing something, it's a good place for meeting resourceful people who may have a little bit more insight and maybe a little bit more experience.
Right.
On behalf of Jarvis Sheffield, who is the
leader,
the king,
the forward thinker,
the king of all he surveys, I think is the title that he has on his business cards. I want to thank everybody for supporting the show. I want to thank everybody for showing up, and I want to thank everybody for their support of what we do, both on the radio show and blacksciencefictionsociety.com.
Well, I got to tell you, my ego is telling me find this podcast and download it real quick.
Well, you don't have to. You can download it, but the other thing that you should do, and anybody else, is put a pointer on your website to where this podcast is. The podcast will be in the TalkShoe host, and it also gets converted by James into a YouTube video. But there's really nothing to look at. He really should have my face on that video for the full 2 hours, so people can. But anyway, link to it.
Just bathe in your glory.
So people. Well, no. I mean, link to it, because That way people can hear who you are, how you got where you are, the things that are important to you, and get to know you as a person. You know, when people have that kind of information and get to know you that well, it certainly helps drive their interest in what it is that you do.
Yeah.
So, having talked enough, and I'm glad you made it. I know you had some trouble getting in, but we got the full 2 hours in, and this was a great. At least to me, it felt like a good interview. I never know because, you know, I'm my entire game is smoke and mirrors. So I just hang on by the edge of my toes to make sure that I can get this done. But seriously, thank you very much for being here, and
you're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time. And we hope to hear from you soon in the future. And for everybody who has checked this out, both live and as a podcast, thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch up with you next time. Have a good evening, day, whatever.
Y'all have it good.